What you're about to hear about America's sweetheart will change everything you thought you knew about the woman behind that radiant smile. The truth about Doris Day's final years has been buried for decades. But tonight, we're opening a door that Hollywood sealed shut 50 years ago. On that cold December night in 1973, screams from Doris Day's Beverly Hills home woke the neighbors. But by morning, no one would speak a single word about that night. The terror in Doris's eyes that evening was the final piece of a devastating secret she had carried for years. When the cameras stopped rolling, when the microphone went silent, when the applause ended, all that remained was the desperation of a woman imprisoned in a golden cage. Everyone who knew Doris Day remembers that legendary smile, that innocent expression on her lips as she sang Que Sera Sera, had touched millions of hearts across America. But no one knew that smile was actually a mask, carefully crafted to hide something much darker. Behind that mask were eyes filled with terror, and tonight you'll discover why. Before we continue with this incredible story, hit that subscribe button for more shocking revelations about Hollywood's golden age that were never meant to be told. Trust me, what you're about to hear will leave you speechless. The nightmare began in 1968. When Doris was at the absolute peak of her career. Her television show, The Doris Day Show, was dominating the ratings week after week. Her films were breaking box office records, and she seemingly had everything America dreamed of. But appearances in Hollywood have always been deceiving, and Doris's perfect life was the biggest deception of all. The man controlling every aspect of her existence was her third husband, Martin Melcher. To the public, he appeared to be the devoted husband and manager, always by her side, always protecting America's sweetheart from the harsh realities of show business. But Martin wasn't her protector. He was her captor, her warden, her systematic destroyer. And the prison he built around Doris was so sophisticated, so psychologically devastating, that she didn't even realize she was trapped until it was almost too late. The control began with small things that seemed loving and protective. Every phone call was monitored, under the guise of screening unwanted interruptions. Every appointment required Martin's approval to ensure it fit with her career goals. Even leaving the house needed his permission to maintain her carefully managed public image. "I'm protecting you from the vultures of Hollywood, darling," Martin would say with that charming smile that had fooled an entire industry. But behind that smile was a calculating mind that was methodically stripping away every piece of Doris's independence. What nobody knew, not even Doris herself for the longest time, was that Martin had been signing contracts and making business deals in her name for years. Her money, her property, her career decisions, even her personal relationships, nothing belonged to her anymore. She had become a prisoner in her own life, performing not just on stage and screen, but every waking moment, playing the role of the happy wife and grateful star while her soul was slowly being crushed. But the most chilling aspect of Martin's control wasn't financial or professional. It was psychological. He had been systematically documenting her private moments for years, collecting a horrifying archive of photographs, recordings, and intimate details that he used as weapons to ensure her complete obedience. The discovery of this surveillance would become the turning point that nearly destroyed her completely. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday in 1970. Doris was looking for some papers in Martin's home office when she accidentally opened the wrong drawer. What she found inside changed everything she thought she knew about her life. Hundreds of photographs showing her in private moments, audio recordings of conversations she'd had with friends, and detailed notes documenting her every mood, every doubt, every moment of vulnerability. Martin had been studying her like a laboratory specimen, learning exactly how to manipulate and control every aspect of her emotional state. When Martin found her standing there with the evidence scattered around her, his reaction was swift and terrifying. There was no anger, no surprise, just cold calculation. "Now you understand," he said quietly. "You belong to me completely. Your image, your reputation, your very identity. I control all of it. And if you ever think about leaving me, the world will see exactly who the real Doris Day is, underneath all that sweetness and light." From that moment forward, Doris lived in a state of constant terror. She knew that Martin possessed enough compromising material to destroy not just her career, but her entire sense of self. The woman who brought joy to millions was drowning in fear every single day, putting on that famous smile while dying inside. The psychological abuse escalated rapidly after her discovery. Martin began isolating her from friends and family, claiming they were trying to turn her against him. He hired private investigators to monitor her movements even when he wasn't present. Phone calls were cut short if he didn't approve of the conversation. Meals were controlled, claiming it was for her health and image. Sleep became elusive as Martin would wake her at random hours to discuss supposed threats to her career that required immediate attention. Most devastating of all, Martin began manipulating her perception of reality itself. He would move items in their home and then insist she had misplaced them. He would cancel appointments and then claim she had forgotten about them. He would intercept mail from family members and then tell Doris that no one had contacted her. Slowly, methodically, he was making her doubt her own mind, her own memory, her own sanity. During this period, those closest to Doris began noticing disturbing changes. Her once spontaneous laughter became forced and mechanical. Her eyes, which had always sparkled with genuine warmth, now carried a distant, haunted quality. When reporters asked about her happiness in interviews, she would recite answers that sounded rehearsed, as if she was reading from a script Martin had prepared. The financial manipulation was equally devastating. While Doris believed she was building wealth for their future, Martin was systematically looting her accounts. He invested her money in his friends' failed ventures, used her name to secure loans for his personal projects, and forged her signature on documents that would eventually leave her responsible for millions in debt. All of this was done with such skill and subtlety that Doris remained completely unaware of the financial time bomb ticking beneath her feet. But perhaps the cruelest aspect of Martin's control was how he weaponized her own success against her. Every achievement, every award, every moment of public adoration became another chain in his psychological prison. "Look how much you need me," he would say after a successful performance. "Without my guidance, you'd be nothing but a small-town girl with a nice voice. I made you into Doris Day, and I can unmake you just as easily." The breaking point came in 1972, during what should have been one of the happiest periods of her career. Doris was preparing for what would unknowingly become her final film, and the pressure from Martin had reached unbearable levels. The constant surveillance, the psychological manipulation, the complete absence of privacy had pushed her to the edge of a complete breakdown. It was during the filming of this movie that Doris discovered Martin's ultimate betrayal. Not only had he been controlling and robbing her, but he had been having an affair for years with a woman who was actively involved in the exploitation of Doris's career. The woman wasn't just Martin's mistress. She was his business partner in the systematic destruction of Doris's life. That night, for the first time in years, Doris confronted Martin directly. "How could you do this to me?" she whispered, tears streaming down her face as she faced the wreckage of her life. Martin's response revealed the true depth of his cruelty. "You think you have choices, Doris? You think you can just walk away? You are Doris Day because I allow you to be Doris Day. Without me, you're nothing but a broken woman with a past that would shock your precious fans." The threat was clear and devastating. Martin had documented not just her private moments, but had orchestrated situations designed to compromise her. Photographs taken out of context, conversations recorded without her knowledge, business meetings where she had expressed doubts about certain decisions, all of it carefully preserved as ammunition to be used against her if she ever tried to escape. But fate, it seemed, had other plans for both of them. On December 20th, 1973, Martin Melcher suffered a massive heart attack while dining at an expensive restaurant in Beverly Hills. As paramedics rushed him to the hospital, Doris followed, not out of love, but out of a complex mixture of duty, fear, and perhaps a desperate hope that his death might finally set her free. In the hospital room, as Martin struggled with his final breaths, he delivered one last act of psychological warfare. Through labored breathing, he whispered to Doris, "In the safe, there's a special gift waiting for you. You'll never escape me, even when I'm gone. You don't even know who you are without me anymore." What Doris discovered in Martin's private safe the next morning became the final chapter in her decades-long nightmare. Not only had Martin stolen virtually every penny of her fortune, over $20 million, but he had also prepared a devastating posthumous attack on her reputation. In addition to the millions in debt that were legally tied to her name through forged documents, Martin had arranged for his collection of compromising materials to be released to the media if anything happened to him. His lawyer arrived at Doris's home the morning after the funeral with an ultimatum that seemed to offer no escape. Mr. Melcher was very specific about his wishes, the lawyer explained with cold professionalism. Either you honor all financial obligations he incurred in your name, or his private collection of materials will be distributed to every major news outlet in the country. You have 48 hours to decide. The materials weren't just embarrassing personal moments. Martin had carefully curated a collection designed to destroy the innocent image that was Doris Day's greatest asset. Photographs taken during her most vulnerable moments, recordings of private conversations where she had expressed doubts and fears, and staged situations that could be easily misinterpreted by a scandal-hungry press. The threat was real, immediate, and seemingly inescapable. That evening, sitting alone in the mansion that had become her prison, Doris faced the complete destruction of everything she had worked for over 30 years. She had no money, no real friends left after years of Martin's isolation tactics, and no apparent escape from his final act of revenge. America's sweetheart was truly alone for the first time in her life. But as she sat there, surrounded by the ruins of her existence, something unexpected happened. Instead of despair, Doris felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Curiosity. Who was she without Martin's constant control? What did she actually think, feel, want, when no one was telling her what to think, feel, or want? For the first time in decades, Doris had to make a real decision about her own life. There was no script, no manager telling her what to do, no carefully constructed public image to maintain. And in that moment of complete vulnerability, she discovered something that Martin had tried for years to destroy: her own strength. The next morning, when the lawyer called demanding her decision, Doris surprised everyone, including herself, with her response. She laughed. It wasn't a bitter laugh or a desperate one. It was the sound of a woman who suddenly realized she had nothing left to lose and therefore everything to gain. "Do it," she told the lawyer. "Release everything. Let the world see who I really am." The lawyer was stunned. This wasn't the response they had expected from America's perpetually accommodating sweetheart. He stammered about the consequences, about her reputation, about the scandal that would destroy what remained of her career. "My reputation?" Doris asked, her voice growing stronger with each word. "My reputation as what? As a woman who was so controlled she couldn't choose her own breakfast? As someone who was afraid to speak her own thoughts? That reputation is already destroyed. The only question is whether I destroyed it myself or whether I let Martin continue destroying it from the grave." But what happened next revealed something profound about celebrity culture and the machinery of public mythology. When Martin's materials reached news outlets across the country, something unprecedented occurred. They chose not to publish them, not out of respect for Doris personally, but out of a collective, almost unconscious understanding that some truths were too damaging to the national psyche. One editor from a major magazine later explained the decision in private. "We realized that exposing Doris Day's pain wouldn't sell magazines. It would break hearts. In a world that was becoming increasingly cynical, she was one of the few symbols of pure innocence we had left. Destroying that would have been like burning down a national monument." This reaction revealed something both beautiful and tragic about Doris's situation. The same system that had enabled Martin's abuse by creating impossible standards of perfection was now protecting her from the consequences of that abuse. She was still trapped, not by one man's cruelty anymore, but by society's desperate need for innocence in an increasingly dark world. The realization that even in apparent freedom, she was still performing a role for others led to Doris's most important transformation. She began to understand that true liberation meant disappointing people, meant allowing others to see her as flawed and human rather than perfect and untouchable. Her decision to retire from public life wasn't announced with fanfare or dramatic press conferences. She simply stopped answering calls from producers, stopped attending industry events, stopped being the person everyone expected her to be. The transition was anything but easy. For months, Doris struggled with intense anxiety about the most basic decisions. What to eat, what to wear, where to go. Choices that most people take for granted had become overwhelming challenges for someone who hadn't made independent decisions in decades. The simple act of choosing what book to read or what television show to watch became monumental exercises in self-discovery. But gradually, with the help of a small circle of trusted friends and a therapist who specialized in helping abuse survivors, Doris began to rediscover herself. She learned to distinguish between her own thoughts and the internalized voice of her controller. She practiced saying no to things she didn't want and yes to things that brought her genuine pleasure, regardless of what others might think. During this period of recovery, Doris began keeping a journal, something Martin had explicitly forbidden during their marriage. Hidden in a simple notebook, she documented her journey back to herself, recording thoughts and feelings that were authentically her own for the first time in decades. March 15th, 1974. Today I ate ice cream for breakfast because I wanted to. Such a small thing, but it felt like a revolution. June 3rd, 1974. I realized today that I don't actually like the color pink very much. Martin always said it was perfect for my image, so I wore it constantly. But I think I prefer blue. How strange to discover your own preferences at 50. November 20th, 1974. A young actress wrote to me, asking for advice about handling Hollywood pressure. I told her, the most dangerous person in your life isn't the critic who tears you down. It's the person who claims they're protecting you while they're actually imprisoning you. The woman who emerged from this process of self-discovery was neither the public Doris Day nor the broken victim Martin had tried to create. She was quieter but more confident, less performative but more genuine, scarred but ultimately much stronger than anyone had imagined possible. In her later years, living quietly with her beloved animals on a ranch far from Hollywood, Doris found something she had never experienced during her decades of fame: genuine peace. She chose her own schedule, her own friends, her own activities. She laughed when she felt like laughing, cried when she needed to cry, and spoke her mind without calculating the effect on her image. When young people in the entertainment industry would occasionally seek her advice, Doris would share the wisdom she had paid so dearly to acquire. Success without freedom is just an elaborate form of slavery, and freedom without the courage to disappoint others isn't really freedom at all. The financial struggles continued for several years, as Doris worked with lawyers to untangle the web of debt and fraud Martin had created. But she approached these challenges with a determination that surprised those who had known her during her years of captivity. She was no longer the passive victim who had allowed others to make every decision for her life. Through careful legal work and the support of friends who had never given up on her, Doris was eventually able to recover enough of her stolen assets to live comfortably. More importantly, she recovered something far more valuable: her sense of self-worth that wasn't dependent on public approval or professional success. The true measure of her transformation came years later, when a documentary filmmaker approached her about telling her story publicly. After careful consideration, Doris declined, but her reason revealed how completely she had reclaimed her life. My story belongs to me now. I spent 30 years performing for others, and I have no intention of performing my pain for their entertainment. Her final diary entry, written decades after Martin's death, captured the ultimate resolution of her journey. Today I realized I can sing Que sera sera again, without feeling afraid, not because I believe whatever will be, but because I finally understand that I have some say in what will be. The cage is open, and I choose to stay free. The golden cage that had imprisoned America's sweetheart had indeed been opened. But more than that, it had been demolished entirely. Doris Day had not just escaped her prison. She had learned to build her own life on her own terms. Flaws and all, fears and all, but finally, completely authentic. Years later, when asked by a close friend what she would want people to remember about her life, Doris smiled. A real smile this time, not the manufactured one that had graced 1,000 movie screens, and said simply, "I hope they remember that it's never too late to save yourself." The screams that had echoed through that Beverly Hills mansion on that cold December night in 1973 had indeed been the beginning of something new. Not the end of Doris Day the star, but the birth of Doris Day the woman, a woman who had found the courage to reclaim her life when it seemed lost forever, and who had learned that the most important performance of all is the brave daily act of being authentically yourself. In the end, perhaps that was her greatest role. Not the innocent characters she had played on screen, but the complex, resilient, ultimately triumphant real woman she had fought so hard to become. The golden cage was empty now, its door standing open forever, a testament to the power of truth over manipulation, of courage over fear, and of authentic self-love over manufactured adoration. And in that freedom, Doris Day had finally found something more valuable than all the fame and fortune she had lost. She had found herself. Vegas, in those days, was a city of secrets, but no secret was as dark as this one. The Rat Pack continued performing. The crowds kept coming, but something had fundamentally changed. Frank would sometimes stop mid-song, his eyes distant, as if remembering that December night. Dean noticed it, Sammy noticed it, but nobody dared ask. In the months that followed, strange things began happening. People who had been in that room started having accidents. One drove off a cliff in California. Another had a heart attack at 42, perfectly healthy until that day. Frank knew these weren't coincidences. He started traveling with more bodyguards, stopped taking certain routes, wouldn't eat at restaurants he hadn't checked first. The Washington man called Frank regularly. Each call brought new demands. Frank had to arrange meetings, introduce certain people to certain circles. He became a bridge between two worlds that should never have connected. Every introduction he made, every hand he shook, pulled him deeper into a web he couldn't escape. Then came November 1963. Frank was in Los Angeles when he heard the news from Dallas. He locked himself in his room for 3 days. Tony Roma stood guard outside, turning everyone away. When Frank finally emerged, he looked like he'd aged 10 years. He knew what his signature had set in motion. The guilt would eat at him for the rest of his life. After Dallas, the calls stopped. The Washington man disappeared. Giancana acted like that night had never happened. But Frank couldn't forget. He started drinking more. His marriages crumbled. His relationship with his children strained. The world saw a superstar living the high life. But inside, Frank was drowning in secrets he could never share. In 1965, Frank tried to break free. He went to the FBI, wanted to tell everything. But when he arrived at the meeting, the agent already knew why he was there. On the agent's desk was a file, thick as a phone book. Frank's name was on it. The agent opened it, showed Frank a single page. It was enough. Frank left without saying a word. The cage had no doors. The following years brought more performances, more albums, more accolades. But every award felt hollow, every standing ovation, a reminder of what he'd lost that night in Vegas. When he sang songs about regret, about choices, about the road not taken, he wasn't performing, he was confessing. Frank's health began declining in the 1980s. The drinking had taken its toll, but it was more than that. The weight of secrets can kill a man slowly. During one of his last concerts, he stopped in the middle of The Way You Look Tonight and just stood there, silent, for a full minute. The audience thought it was emotion. It was memory. Tony Roma visited Frank regularly in his final years. They would sit in silence mostly, two old men carrying the burden of that December night. Sometimes Frank would ask Tony if he thought they'd be forgiven. Tony never answered. Some things are beyond forgiveness. In 1997, a year before Frank died, he gave Tony a sealed envelope. He made Tony promise not to open it until after both of them were gone. Tony kept that promise. Inside was Frank's confession, written in his shaky handwriting. Every detail of that night, every name, every threat, every regret. Frank wanted the truth known, but only when it couldn't hurt anyone still living. But here's what nobody knew until Tony's recording surfaced. There was another person in that room that night, a young woman, barely 20, who served drinks and was supposed to leave. But she didn't leave. She hid behind a curtain and heard everything. She was Giancana's niece, and she kept a diary. That diary surfaced in 2020. when her estate was settled. Her entries from December 1963 match Tony's recordings perfectly, but she adds details Tony didn't know. The Washington man's real name, the exact nature of the Dallas plan, the names of everyone who would be eliminated to keep the secret. Frank's name was on that list too, but someone had crossed it out. A note in the margin said simply, "Too visible, natural causes." Frank lived another 35 years after that night, but in many ways, he died in that room on the 17th floor. The man who walked out wasn't the same one who walked in. He became a ghost haunting his own life, singing songs about a freedom he'd lost, a choice he'd surrendered, a soul he'd sold for a price he never wanted to pay. The saddest part is what Tony revealed in his final recording. Frank's last words to him, just days before he died. "Tony, I should have walked away. I should have let them destroy me. It would have been cleaner than this." Tony's voice breaks on the recording as he adds, "He was right. Some prices are too high, even for survival." When I first heard these recordings, I couldn't believe them. But then I started researching. Every date checks out. Every name Tony mentioned had connections to that world. The Washington man's identity, when I finally confirmed it, made my hands shake. This wasn't just about Frank. This was about the highest levels of power in America, about decisions that shaped history, about secrets that could still destroy lives today. The other members of the Rat Pack suspected something, but never knew the full truth. Dean Martin once told his son that Frank had changed after that December, that something had broken inside him. Sammy Davis Jr. wrote in a draft of his autobiography, later edited out, that Frank would sometimes look at him with such sadness, as if apologizing for something Sammy didn't understand. Peter Lawford knew more than the others. His connection to the Kennedys made him valuable and vulnerable. After that night, Frank gradually pushed Peter away. Not from anger, but from protection. Frank knew that anyone too close to the truth was in danger. Peter's decline into alcoholism and early death at 61 wasn't coincidental. He knew too much and couldn't live with it. Joey Bishop, the last surviving member of the Rat Pack, gave an interview in 2007, just months before his death. The interviewer asked him about Frank's transformation in the mid-60s. Joey stared at the camera for a long moment, then said, "Some stories should die with the people who lived them." He refused to elaborate, but his eyes said everything. The Sands Hotel was demolished in 1996. When they were clearing the 17th floor, construction workers found something strange. Behind a wall in the suite at the end of the corridor, there was a hidden compartment. Inside were recording devices, old but sophisticated for their time. The FBI was called. The devices were confiscated. The official report states nothing was found. But one of the workers took a photo before the FBI arrived. In the photo, you can see reels of tape. We'll never know what was on them. Frank's grave at Desert Memorial Park is simple. "The best is yet to come" is etched on his headstone. Visitors leave Jack Daniels bottles and cigarettes. But sometimes, you'll find a single red rose with a note that says only, "For the secrets you kept." Nobody knows who leaves them, but they appear every December, on the anniversary of that night. The real tragedy is that Frank spent his last decades trying to make amends in his own way. His charitable work, his support for civil rights, his dedication to helping young artists. It was all genuine, but it was also penance. He once told Tony that every good deed felt like trying to wash blood off his hands that only he could see. In one of the recordings, Tony mentions a moment that haunts me. After the meeting ended and everyone was leaving, Frank turned to Giancana and asked, "How do you live with it?" Giancana's response was chilling. "I don't live with it, Frank. I am it. Now so are you." That transformation, from Frank Sinatra the entertainer to Frank Sinatra the keeper of America's darkest secret, happened in just 3 hours on a December night in 1963. He walked into that room as one man and left as another. The world never knew the difference, but Frank lived with it every day until he drew his last breath. The most disturbing part of Tony's final recording is his revelation about why Frank was chosen. It wasn't just his connections or his influence. Giancana knew Frank's weakness, his loyalty to his friends. They knew he would do anything to protect the people he loved. They used his greatest virtue as the weapon to destroy him. Frank realized this too late, and the knowledge that his love for others had been weaponized against him was perhaps the cruelest cut of all. Today, most of the people involved are dead. The few who remain are in their 90s, taking their secrets to graves that are rapidly approaching. But the recordings exist. The diary exists. The evidence, scattered and hidden, tells a story that reshapes our understanding of that era. Frank Sinatra wasn't just an entertainer who knew dangerous people. He was a man forced to become a pivotal piece in a game so dangerous that even now, 60 years later, there are those who would kill to keep it buried. The last thing Tony recorded, just days before his own death, was a warning. If you're listening to this, be careful. They told us it was over when Frank died. They lied. It's never over. Some secrets are like radiation. They keep poisoning long after the source is gone. Frank knew this. He tried to warn me. Now I'm warning you. I've thought long and hard about sharing this story. The danger is real, even now. But Frank deserves to have his truth told. He wasn't just the voice or old blue eyes. He was a man caught in an impossible situation who paid the ultimate price. Not his life, but his soul. And he paid it to protect others, to prevent even worse outcomes, to navigate an impossible choice between personal destruction and becoming an accomplice to history's darkest moments. When you listen to Frank's music now, knowing what you hear it differently. The melancholy in the wee small hours, the defiance in My Way, the resignation in That's Life. They weren't just songs. They were confessions hidden in plain sight, messages in bottles thrown into an ocean of audiences who could never understand their real meaning. Frank Sinatra died on May 14, 1998, at 82 years old. The official cause was heart attack, but Tony Roma knew better. Frank had been ready to die for years. He'd been dying since December 1963. It just took his body 35 years to catch up with his spirit. The 17th floor of the Sands Hotel is gone now, but its ghosts remain. Sometimes, late at night in Vegas, old-timers say you can still hear music drifting through the desert air. I've Got You Under My Skin, the song that was playing when Frank Sinatra walked into that room and lost himself forever. This is the story that was buried for 60 years. This is the truth about the night that changed everything. And now that you know it, you understand why some secrets should never have been kept, and why some men pay prices that no amount of fame or fortune can ever redeem. Frank's final recording, made just weeks before his death, has him singing My Way one last time. But if you listen carefully, at the very end, after the music stops, you can hear him whisper something. Tony enhanced the audio. Frank's words are clear. Forgive me. We may never know who he was asking. Maybe all of us. Maybe none of us. Maybe God himself. But one thing is certain. Frank Sinatra went to his grave, carrying the weight of that December night in 1963, when the mob, the government, and forces beyond our understanding came together in a room on the 17th floor of the Sands Hotel and changed not just one man's life, but the course of American history itself. The best was yet to come? No. For Frank, the best ended that night in Vegas. Everything after was just a man trying to find redemption in a world that had already condemned him. And perhaps that's the greatest tragedy of all, that the voice that brought joy to millions was silenced by secrets he never wanted to keep, singing songs of freedom while living in the most elaborate prison ever constructed, the prison of truth, too dangerous to tell.